She waited where the road met the station, where promises were supposed to arrive on time. Snow fell softly that morning, thick enough to silence the world but not her thoughts. Eleanor Whitmore sat on the edge of the wooden platform, her thin coat pulled tight around her shoulders, her bare feet hidden beneath the hem of a faded brown dress. She had stopped caring how it looked. All that mattered was the letter in her trembling hands, the last words. From the man who had sworn he would come back for her, dressed as a groom, ready to take her away from a life that had grown too heavy to carry alone. The letter was creased from being read too many times. "Wait for me," it had said. "No matter what, wait." And so she did. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. And still Eleanor returned to the station every morning, convinced that love, like trains, could be late but never truly gone. People in town whispered when they passed her. Some pitied her. Others mocked her. A woman waiting for a groom who never came was an easy story to tell. Easier still to laugh at. But Eleanor wasn't waiting for laughter. She was waiting for a future she had already built in her heart. She remembered the way Thomas had looked at her when he left. Hands rough from work, eyes soft with promises. He had spoken of saving money, of returning with enough to start fresh, maybe even buy land out west. Eleanor had believed him because believing was easier than surviving alone. Behind her, life continued without mercy. Children ran along the platform, their laughter sharp against the cold air. Families hurried past, bundled in coats and certainty. Eleanor stayed still, reading the same words, tracing the same ink, as if doing so could summon him from wherever the world had swallowed him. She did not notice the man watching her at first. He stood at a distance, tall and broad-shouldered, dressed in a long wool coat that looked far too fine for this forgotten station. His name was Henry Calloway, and everyone in 3 counties knew it. Wealthy rancher, widower, a man who owned more land than some towns had houses. He had come to the station on business, or so he told himself. But the sight of Eleanor sitting there, quiet, broken, stubborn, stopped him cold. Henry had seen hardship before. Ranching taught a man that. He had buried a wife, lost cattle to storms, watched dreams dry up under unforgiving suns. But there was, something different about this woman. She wasn't begging. She wasn't crying. She was waiting. And waiting, Henry knew, took a kind of strength most people never had to use. He watched as snow settled on her hair, melting slowly, as if even winter was reluctant to disturb her hope. A child ran past and nearly slipped. Eleanor reached out instinctively, steadying the little one with a gentle hand before returning to her letter. Henry felt something tighten in his chest. He told himself it was nothing, just curiosity, just sympathy. Yet his feet carried him closer before his mind could stop them. He cleared his throat softly, not wanting to startle her. Eleanor looked up, eyes red-rimmed but sharp. The eyes of someone who had cried all her tears long ago. For a moment neither spoke. The wind filled the silence, carrying the distant sound of a train that was not hers. Henry tipped his hat politely. "Cold morning," he said, the understatement almost painful. Eleanor nodded. "They all are," she replied. Her voice was steady, practiced. Henry glanced at the letter in her hands, then back at her face. "Are you waiting for someone?" The question felt foolish the moment it left his mouth. But Eleanor did not bristle. She did not scoff. She simply answered, "Yes, my groom." There was no shame in her voice, no doubt. Henry had heard many lies in his life, but this was not one of them. "He'll come," she added, as if saying it aloud might make it true. Henry hesitated. He had learned long ago that words could be dangerous things. Still, he said gently, "Trains don't always keep their promises." Eleanor smiled then, a small, sad smile. "People don't either, but I'm still here." That answer followed Henry all the way back to his carriage. As he rode toward his ranch, he couldn't shake the image of her sitting there, refusing to surrender to the world's indifference. He told himself it was none of his concern. He had land to manage, workers to pay, a life carefully constructed to avoid attachments that could be lost. Yet that night, as he stared into the fire in his grand but empty home, he realized something unsettling. Eleanor Whitmore had already become part of his thoughts. And without knowing it, she had just stepped into a story that would change both their lives forever. If you're drawn to stories of quiet strength, unexpected choices, and lives colliding in ways no one could predict, make sure you stay with us. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications, because what Henry Calloway does next will shock everyone. And this story is only just beginning. The next morning arrived with a pale sun and a colder wind, the kind that cut through layers and settled into bone. Eleanor returned to the station as she always did. Before the town fully woke, before pitying eyes could find her, she sat in the same place, folded her feet beneath her dress to numb the ache, and unfolded the letter again. The paper had grown soft with age, the ink faint in places where her fingers lingered too long. Around her, the station breathed its familiar sounds, wood creaking, wind whistling through gaps, the distant cry of a crow. She told herself today would be different. She always did. What she did not know was that someone else had made the same promise to himself the night before. Henry Calloway stood at the edge of the platform, watching her from a respectful distance. He had not planned to return. He had argued with himself all night, listing reasons to stay away. It wasn't his place. He had no business meddling. Compassion could become a weakness. But as dawn broke, those reasons crumbled beneath a simpler truth. He could not ignore what he had seen. A woman abandoned by time, holding on to hope as if it were the last solid thing beneath her feet. Henry approached slowly, boots crunching against frost. Eleanor sensed him before she saw him, looking up with a guarded expression that softened when she recognized the man from yesterday. "You're back," she said, more observation than invitation. Henry nodded. "I thought you might need company." Eleanor studied him, weighing his words the way she weighed every promise now. "I don't need much," she replied. "Just time." Henry smiled faintly. "Time can be heavy when you carry it alone." They spoke in fragments at first, small, careful sentences that skirted around pain. Henry asked about the letter. Eleanor told him about Thomas, about the plans they had made, about the way he had kissed her forehead and said he would return before the first snow fell. That snow had melted and returned again. "People say I'm foolish," she said quietly. "Maybe I am." Henry shook his head. "Waiting doesn't make you foolish. It makes you brave." The word surprised her. Brave was not how Eleanor saw herself. She saw a woman stuck between past and future, clinging to something that might already be gone. Yet hearing it spoken aloud stirred something long dormant, a reminder that endurance was a kind of courage. As days passed, Henry began visiting regularly. Sometimes they talked. Sometimes they sat in silence, watching trains arrive and depart without ceremony. Townsfolk noticed. Whispers grew sharper. Why was a man like Calloway spending time with the station woman? Some said he pitied her. Others said he was bored. No one guessed the truth, that Henry, who had lost faith in waiting after burying his wife, was learning from Eleanor how to sit with uncertainty again. One afternoon, a storm rolled in suddenly, snow thick and blinding. Eleanor's hands shook as she tried to fold the letter, the cold stealing her strength. Without a word, Henry draped his coat over her shoulders. She stiffened at first, pride flaring, then relented when warmth seeped into her skin. "You don't have to," she began. "I want to," he said simply. That night, Henry lay awake, staring at the ceiling of his vast bedroom. He realized he had crossed an invisible line. This was no longer curiosity. It was concern, and concern had a way of demanding action. The next morning, he arrived with a proposal he had rehearsed and doubted 100 times. "Come to the ranch," he said. Eleanor blinked, startled. "I'm not asking you to stop waiting," he added quickly. "Just wait somewhere warm, somewhere safe." Eleanor's first instinct was refusal. Leaving the station felt like betrayal, as if Thomas might arrive the moment she stepped away. But Henry's eyes held no pressure, only sincerity. "You can return whenever you want," he said. "I give you my word." Words had failed her before. Still, something about his steadiness felt different. After a long pause, she nodded. The ranch was nothing like Eleanor imagined. Wide fields stretched beneath open sky. Barns stood sturdy against the wind. And the house, large but not ostentatious, felt lived in rather than lonely. Henry showed her a small room overlooking the pastures. "It's yours," he said. "For as long as you need." Eleanor unpacked little. She kept the letter close. Days at the ranch passed quietly. She helped in the kitchen, mended clothes, learned the rhythm of ranch life. Warmth returned to her body, color to her cheeks. Yet every morning she watched the road from the window, half expecting a familiar figure to appear. Henry never questioned her waiting. He never mocked it. Instead, he listened, and in listening something unexpected happened. Eleanor began to heal even as she held on to hope. One evening, news arrived from town. A traveler had mentioned a man matching Thomas's description. Seen months ago. Injured, heading east. The words hit Eleanor like a blow. Injured, east, away. Her hands trembled as she clutched the letter. Henry stood beside her, silent but present. That night, Eleanor cried for the first time in years, and Henry made a decision that would change everything. If you feel the pull of stories where kindness challenges, fate and courage takes unexpected forms, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and stay with us, because what Henry Calloway decides to do next will leave no life untouched, least of all Eleanor's. The decision Henry Calloway made did not arrive in a burst of heroism or a grand declaration. It came quietly in the hours before dawn, when the ranch slept, and the wind whispered through the grass like an old confession. He sat at the heavy oak table in his study, the same table where he had once signed deeds, contracts, and the final papers that declared his wife gone from this world. Now spread before him were maps, letters, and notes he had gathered in silence. Names of towns, dates of passing trains, rumors overheard and confirmed. Henry had never been a man who acted without certainty, but Eleanor had taught him something new. Sometimes action mattered more than assurance. When Eleanor woke that morning, she found him waiting in the kitchen, coat already on. "I'm going to find him," he said, as if announcing the weather. She stared at him, disbelief rising like a tide. "You don't even know him," she whispered. Henry met her gaze steadily. "I know what it means to wait for someone who doesn't come, and I know what it costs to never know why." Eleanor tried to protest. She told him it was too dangerous, too uncertain, too much to ask. Henry listened, then shook his head. Some debts aren't asked for. They're chosen. By noon he was gone, riding out with supplies, and spring arrived quietly, as if unsure it was welcome after all that winter had taken. The land around the ranch softened first, snow retreating into soil, grass pushing through in fragile green threads. Eleanor noticed the change before anyone else. Waiting had trained her to see small shifts, and now she felt them not as promises deferred, but as life moving forward. She no longer rose with the same ache in her chest, no longer listened for footsteps that belonged to another man's past, yet something new had settled into her days, something both comforting and terrifying, possibility. Henry Calloway gave her that space without naming it. He did not rush her with confessions or expectations. He treated her with the same steady respect he offered his land. Careful, patient, protective without ownership. The town, however, was less restrained. Word traveled fast, a wealthy rancher searching for a poor woman's missing groom, bringing him back only to see her turn away. People shook their heads. Some called Henry noble, others called him foolish. They were all wrong. Henry had not acted for praise. He had acted because he knew what it meant to live with unfinished stories. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the fields gold, Henry invited Eleanor to walk the far fence line with him. They spoke of small things at first, weather, crops, repairs. Then Henry stopped. "I've decided something," he said, voice calm but resolute. Eleanor turned, heart quickening. "I'm dividing the south pasture," he continued. "I'm transferring it into your name." The words landed like thunder. Eleanor stared at him, certain she had misunderstood. "Your name," he repeated. "Land, livestock, income. Enough that you'll never have to wait again on anyone." Shock rippled through her. "Why would you do that?" she asked. Henry's answer was simple. "Because when you were waiting at that station, the world walked past you." "I won't." Eleanor tried to refuse. Pride rose up, fierce and trembling. But Henry held up a hand. "This isn't charity. It's recognition. You taught me something I forgot, that love isn't proven by what you promise, but by what you do when nothing is guaranteed." The town erupted when the news spread. A woman with no dowry, no family name, now a landowner beside one of the wealthiest men in the region. Some accused Eleanor of manipulation, others accused Henry of madness. He answered none of them. Instead, he stood beside Eleanor at the county office, signing papers that changed her future forever. Weeks later, at the same station where Eleanor once waited barefoot in the snow, a gathering formed. People expected an announcement, perhaps even a wedding. What they received was something far more unexpected. Eleanor stepped forward and spoke, not of romance, but of dignity. She spoke of waiting, of being seen, of how one person's kindness had given her back her life. Then Henry joined her. "This woman waited for love," he said, And when it didn't come, she didn't break. She became stronger. Only then did he take Eleanor's hand, not as a rescuer, not as a savior, but as an equal. Their marriage, when it came later, was quiet. No spectacle, no grand arrival. Just two people choosing each other without fear or illusion. Eleanor no longer waited at stations. She walked her land. She made decisions. She laughed freely. And Henry, once a man closed off by loss, found that generosity had opened his life in ways wealth never could. This story spread not because of scandal, but because it reminded people of something they had forgotten, that the greatest shocks in life come not from cruelty, but from unexpected kindness. If this story touched you, if you believe in second chances, quiet strength, and love proven through action, subscribe to the channel and stay with us. More powerful stories like this are waiting, and unlike the groom in this tale, they always arrive. Determination. Leaving Eleanor alone with her thoughts and her fears. Days passed slowly. Eleanor returned to routines to quiet her mind. Baking bread, tending the garden, helping the hands in the barn. Yet every sound of hoofbeats made her heart leap. She replayed Henry's words again and again, torn between gratitude and guilt. She had waited for Thomas with blind faith. Now someone else was carrying that faith on her behalf. In towns along the rail lines, Henry asked questions. He followed leads that dead-ended and others that cut too close to hope. He learned that Thomas had indeed been injured, caught in a machinery accident at a rail yard. He had survived, but survival had come at a cost. A man with a limp heading east, ashamed to return home empty-handed. Henry pressed on. Weeks later, in a small soot-stained town, he found him. Thomas Whitaker sat outside a boarding house. Thinner than the man Eleanor remembered, eyes hollowed by disappointment. When Henry spoke Eleanor's name, Thomas flinched as if struck. "She shouldn't still be waiting," he said hoarsely. "I failed her." Henry saw not a villain, but a broken man drowning in pride. "She doesn't need wealth," Henry replied. "She needs truth." The journey back was heavy with silence. Thomas wrestled with fear of Eleanor's disappointment, fear of facing the life he'd abandoned. Henry offered no false comfort, only honesty. When they arrived at the ranch, Eleanor was in the yard, hands deep in earth, planting for spring. She looked up and froze. Time seemed to fold in on itself. Thomas stepped forward, halting, tears streaking his weathered face. Eleanor rose slowly. The letter slipped from her pocket and fell to the ground. Words failed them both. Finally, Thomas spoke, voice cracking as he confessed everything, his injury, his shame, his belief that Eleanor deserved better than a broken promise. Eleanor listened without interruption. When he finished, she picked up the letter, smoothed it once, and then did something no one expected. She let it go. "I waited," she said softly, "but waiting doesn't mean stopping my life." Thomas wept, not for what he had lost, but for what he had misunderstood. Eleanor wished him peace, not reconciliation. And in that moment, something extraordinary happened. She chose herself. Henry watched from a distance, heart heavy and light all at once. He had brought closure, but he had also realized a truth he could no longer ignore. His feelings for Eleanor had grown beyond compassion. That night, Eleanor sat on the porch, stars spread wide above her. Henry joined her, leaving space between them. "Thank you," she said, "for giving me an ending." Henry shook his head. "You gave yourself a beginning." The wind carried away the last remnants of winter, and with it the life Eleanor had been waiting to reclaim. If this chapter moved you, if you believe in the power of choice, healing, and unexpected courage, make sure you subscribe to the channel. The final chapter will